respected MD, all my senior colleagues, and members who render resuscitation in the hospital at every stage. Although I had been asked to talk to you about emergency endotracheal intubation, I felt that it would be better to talk little about airway, management of the airway and breathing, and then subsequently have an introduction to intubation. But more important is to invite you for hands-on training in endotracheal intubation in the operation theatre, because that is the place where maximum number of intubations occur during the week. So all my colleagues in the different departments spend a little time. Presently we have got people who have had their exposure to intubation, so we can, I think Dr. Dasgupta, we can give chances to our colleagues who come in there, one on each day, not more than one. It will be difficult for us to accommodate more than one, because then our juniors would start cribbing that they are being deprived of their chances. Because that is the only way where you can get your confidence in intubation, and you can never know when you will be required to do intubation. This is just a recapitulation of something which you already know. What are the functions of the airway? Without wasting any time, we'll go to the next. What are the different ways of opening up the airway? This is applicable not only in the hospital, that is on the patient bed, but otherwise also away from the hospital. And these are simple techniques of head tilt, chin lift, jaw thrust. The third, suctioning is only possible where you have a proper suction machine at your side. And then introduction of these aids to keep the airway patent, the nasopharyngeal airway and the oropharyngeal airway. When do we use the head tilt and chin lift? This is very important when there is no neck injury suspected in the patient. Simple reason being that any manipulation with the neck in a patient suspected of a neck injury, that is a road traffic accident who lands up in the hospital or the casualty, could endanger the spinal cord and produce some unwanted damage which we really want to avoid. It's a temporary procedure. It cannot replace the other aids in maintaining a patent airway, and it must be replaced with an airway adjunct unless the patient starts breathing spontaneously and adequately. This, of course, is unnecessary, because unless and until it is demonstrated on a mannequin, this cannot be remembered. Just by memorizing that you place a hand here and you place your palm there is, I feel, not adequate for anybody to take home the message how to do a head tilt and chin lift. Very soon, with the help of Dr. Dasgupta, we are going to get the mannequins where you can practice all these things of CPR as well as the basic life support, as well as intubation. Intubation, of course, will allow you to do it in the patients in the OT. We also have facilities for mannequins for endotracheal intubation, but I don't think we'll require that if you can practice it on live patients. Jaw thrust is another alternative to head tilt, chin lift. Now, why do we do suctioning of the oral passages? You all know it, but I am just repeating it for us to recapitulate. Mainly to remove any foreign body which is in the air passage. It may not be adequate for removing large solid objects like dentures, like foreign bodies, like food particles which the person or the patient has vomited out. And it should be performed immediately. That means when you are inspecting the patient or examining, not only your eyes but your ears should be equally sensitive to detect any abnormal sound which is created while the air is passing through the air passages of the patient. These are the suction devices available. We'll skip. Now, this is something which we may remember because this will be helpful in our day-to-day use. A rigid suction catheter, and we have a soft. Normally we use here the soft suction catheters which are available in the ward, disposable ones or red rubber catheters. But then they are not always useful in unconscious or semi-conscious patients, because the air passage may not be open, the mouth may not be open, your soft catheter may get kinked while you are introducing it. So that just keep it in mind. If a patient is unconscious, the air passage is difficult to manipulate. a little rigid suction catheter would be helpful in removing or cleaning up the air passage. Now, we were talking about airways. This is a pictorial or diagrammatic representation of a nasopharyngeal airway introduced through the nostril, and it goes right up to the pharynx, the oropharynx, through the nasopharynx into the oropharynx. How do we measure the length of this? Very simple, from the tragus of the ear to the tip of the nose. All of you know it, just recapitulating. In fact, while introducing a nasal catheter for giving oxygen to the patient, we had learned during our residency days, that was also one of the ways, not the tip of the nose, but you should measure it from the tragus to the tip of the nose so that your nasal catheter goes at least 80% inside and not just outside. Now here the assumption is that the patient will tolerate this nasopharyngeal airway, which may not be true always. What are the oropharyngeal airways? Something similar but slightly different. Here you introduce through the mouth, and the technique of introducing this is a little different. Anybody in the audience except from my anesthesia friends and the ICU sisters? Yes, please.
So we introduce it with a curve towards the heart palate?
Exactly. That is the tip of the procedure. And why do we do it?
So that it accommodates the curvature of the tongue when we turn it reverse it.
Partially correct, but the main fact is we do not want it to go under the tongue. So if you are putting it reverse, hitting the heart palate and then turning it and putting below, you can avoid going under the tongue, because sometimes we feel complacent having introduced the airway, but actually it is under the tongue and it is more of an obstruction than a passage. This of course is more important while we are assessing patients for intubation in our PAC clinics. Now, this is a video and I will just show it to you. This is what I think will be helpful in seeing the steps of intubation. Can you hear anything?
Still louder.
Advance the laryngoscope slightly until the tip of the epiglottis can be seen posterior to the back of the tongue. Advance the tip of the laryngoscope blade into the vallecula between the epiglottis and the tongue. With the handle of the laryngoscope pointing away from you at 45 degrees, lift upwards and away to lift up the tongue and epiglottis to display the vocal cords and the laryngeum. With the right hand, insert the endotracheal tube from the right-hand side of the mouth directly between the cords and move the trachea until the cover passes through the cords. The markings on the tube at the incisors will show between 21 and 24 centimeters in the average sized adult when the tube is in position. Remove the laryngoscope and inflate the cup with approximately 15 mL of air to prevent air leaking during ventilation. Attach the tube to the bag and valve apparatus and ventilate the patient with the oxygen flow on 12 to 15 liters per minute. Confirm the position of the tube by auscultating over the apices of the lungs, the axillae and the stomach. If it is not in the correct position, deflate the cup and remove the tube. Resort back to bag and mask ventilation and repeat the intubation process from the beginning. If the tube is in too far, the right lung will be ventilated only via the right main bronchus. If this occurs, deflate the cup and withdraw the tube 2 to 3 centimeters. Re-inflate the cup and rotate the position. When the tube is in the correct position, tie it in place with cotton tape and attach the tube to the ventilating apparatus and ventilate the patient.
That was self-explanatory, doesn't need any explanation. Any questions on that? I'm sure you won't have. Now, all this we are doing for a specific purpose. What is the purpose? To ensure adequate oxygenation. And although we know all these things, adequate breathing, what should be the rate, what should be the rhythm, just to recapitulate once again, how do we detect that the patient requires support? The inadequate quality could be detected with an irregular rhythm. It could be detected with absence of respiration at the mouth, at the nose. And how do we detect this? You have to use all your faculties while you are examining the patient. Go close to the patient. Feel the breath on your cheek. See the movement of the chest or the flaring of the nostrils with your eyes. And at the same time, look at the color of the mucosa. All these will tell you whether the patient is breathing. The breath sounds, of course, here again you have to use your ear. If there are abnormal breath sounds in the presence of any foreign body in the air passages, any passage of air will generate some quality of sound which is not normal in a normal individual. So you can immediately detect that there is something amiss and take corrective measures. What are the skin changes? All of you are aware. Pale, cool, clammy skin is the early sign, subsequently cyanosis. But in people of Indian origin like me, the dark skin, sometimes it's very difficult to ascertain cyanosis. Nevertheless, with experience, you can make out even in the dark skin, the mucosa when it turns dark, not necessarily the classical blue, you can make out that it is not normal. Use of the accessory muscles of respiration, retraction of soft tissue above clavicle, below rib, the rib cage, any abnormality from the normal, deviation from the normal type of respiration, you should suspect that there is something amiss and take corrective measures. Now, what are the different ventilation techniques that are available to us in the hospital? One is using the mouth to mask. If you care to visit the casualty, we have kept in the casualty mask which has got a tube connected to it with a one-way valve, where you don't have to put your mouth to the patient's mouth to give artificial respiration. Because the most easily available ventilator anywhere is yourself. You are a person who can generate 500 to 700 ml of air, which contains around 17% at the minimum. Atmospheric air contains 21%, our expired air contains 15%. If we take a deep breath and breathe into the patient, it will contain above 15%. And we require around 5. So we have got adequate oxygen to oxygenate the patient if you do a mouth-to-mouth breathing. Now, in addition to this, we have various other equipments available in the hospital which I have brought for you to see. I am sure all of you are using it in the wards at the bedside. One is the bag and mask. Here it is important to know how you fix the mask. All of you are aware what is the mask, how is it shaped, where should it be placed. I'll just show it to you for demonstration. This is a ambu bag, all of you know. It has got an oxygen connection whereby you can connect it to the source of oxygen to increase the oxygen concentration in the bag. You have a face mask and a one-way valve. Now, this face mask has got a definite shape. It's got a base and an apex. The shape itself suggests that the apex is supposed to fit on the bridge of the nose. The apex is supposed to fit on the bridge of the nose. The base is supposed to fit below the lips on the margin of the jaw. And your hand is supposed to thumb on the apex, the middle finger on the base, and the last 2 fingers to lift up the jaw to make an airtight fitting on the mouth. Earlier there used to be opaque masks which had a disadvantage of not being able to see what is inside, because in these sort of patients who are at a compromised condition, there is every chance the patient can vomit. Here through these transparent masks, you can see if there is any vomitus, any foreign body, any secretion, blood, whatever, and immediately clean it. So this is the advantage of having transparent masks nowadays. You can fit it on the patient, and while you are doing it, you have to lift up the chin, because the direction of the air that you push through from the bag into the patient's passage has to go into a straight line. That is, our trachea and pharynx has to be kept in an alignment so that the air that you push in doesn't meet with any obstruction. When you have your first-hand knowledge with the mannequin, you will see, because you have to get practice to doing back mask ventilation before you try to intubate. Because you just can't go in and rush in for intubation without oxygenating the patient. As you have seen in the demonstration video also, the first step is pre-oxygenate the patient so that you build up oxygen reserve in the patient while you are intubating. Because your entire intubating procedure is done in a state of apnea for the patient. And if you have not built up the oxygen reserve, the levels can go down to very dangerous levels, which you do not really want while you are doing a resuscitation. Although all of you are continuously using the bag mask in the wards when emergency arise, it is never harmful to again recapitulate what you are already doing so that we can correct ourselves. Next, which I was already saying about mouth to mouth, and I would request Dr. Jha, as a follow-up to this, we would have a CPR, basic life support demo here for all of us, because let us not assume that I know everything about BLS. These are of course practical points. This is what I was talking about, fixing of the mask, the base, with the margin of the jaw. And you can see, as I was mentioning, the index finger on the lower margin, the thumb on the apex, and 3 fingers used to lift up the jaw for our ASC connection. A number of things are mentioned in this, but if you are practiced enough, one rescuer can give adequate bag mask ventilation. I do not agree with single rescuer may have difficulty in maintaining the ASC. This can be only possible where the person who is resuscitating has got very small hands, is very weak, but I have confidence that all of us who are working in this hospital are not that weak. We can hold a mask tightly. So I do not totally agree with a single rescuer will have difficulty in maintaining a airtight seat. Of course, the more the better. If you have a second person, a person can help you, because continuing with this process is quite tiresome, let me tell you. So you always require help. And I am sure in the hospital atmosphere, in the hospital premises, when you are doing a resuscitation, it is common knowledge that people gather, whatever they are doing, they come up for giving assistance. While you are doing a bag and mask ventilation, what we had mentioned earlier, it is always imperative that you ensure the patency of the airway. And while you are ensuring the patency of the airway, it is not only suctioning and cleaning of the airway, but also of introducing adjuncts for ventilation, which means either a nasopharyngeal airway, which I would suggest not to use because it's a difficult procedure, it could be traumatic. You can injure the patient's nostrils and cause something which you really don't want, a lot of bleeding, which will be difficult to account for. It is always preferable, if there are no oral injuries or if there are no road traffic injuries involving the jaw or tongue, to put in a oropharyngeal airway, which is much simpler, less traumatic, and you can see it yourself. This is of course the technique of providing the bag ventilation with mask. Now, this is something which often ask ourselves, or it's what they call now as FAQs, frequently asked questions. Who needs assistance in breathing? The first is very simple. A patient who is not breathing. Definitely a patient who is not breathing would require assistance. This is where your assessment is important. A patient who has reduced respiratory rate and tidal volume. This of course on the bedside could be done if you have a tidal volume, a spirometer, a small little spirometer with which you can measure the tidal volume of the patient fixed on this mask. you have a dial spirometer with which you can measure the tidal volume. But at the bedside, it is not always required. A patient whose breathing rate is increased but whose tidal volume is inadequate. Along with this, you have to again reassess the patient in its totality. You have to see whether the patient is sweating, whether there are signs of CO2 retention, whether there are signs of tachycardia, sweating, pallor, cyanosis, or the patient is unusually restless due to the respiratory obstruction. So it has to be a comprehensive examination of the patient before you start your assistance in ventilation. Now, patients who are breathing, who require your support, are those who are having inadequate ventilation. Here, of course, nowadays we have a very big help in fixing up a pulse oximeter to see the oxygen saturation. Anytime it falls below 70, you call up your friend who can intubate and put him on a ventilator. But apart from that, you can supplement that oxygen and see if there is any improvement. You can improve the position of the patient and see whether that improves the saturation. After you have failed doing all these things and the patient is not improved, only then and then only you can think of putting the patient on a ventilator. Now, one thing we have to remember, trying to ventilate a patient who is conscious with a bag mask, who is trying to breathe himself, can occasionally be very difficult. Patient may not accept your efforts and may start being restless and start resisting what you are doing. So here you have to use your power of convincing the patient, trying to counsel him. And if the patient is in, mostly those patients who are in COPD in very high CO2 levels, they have got an altered sensorium and they may not listen to what you are saying or they may not understand whatever you are saying. There, of course, I would suggest that we do bag mask or whatever, or maybe intubate the patient and go in for a mechanized ventilation where we improve the patient's condition and reduce the CO2 level.